Hello everyone, welcome to the session. Right, so in this session we'll start off with a new concept called as TestNG. Okay, so coming to the agenda, we'll first get an introduction to what exactly does TestNG mean, what it does and all. Okay, and then we'll look into how we can install TestNG, where we'll look into how we can add the TestNG plugin and the corresponding dependencies to our IDE. Okay, and then finally we'll move ahead and we'll write our first test case using TestNG. Here also we'll discuss about certain key aspects like @test notation, assertions, and so on and so forth. Right. Okay, so till now we have been using Selenium to automate our web application testing process. Right, so we used Selenium to test different parts of the next-gen application. If you remember, we tested the login page, the home page, the products page, and so on, right? So even though Selenium is widely used for website testing, there are certain limitations in Selenium that may impact the entire testing process, right? So these limitations could be like parallel testing, test management, test reporting, and so on, right? So let's try to understand these limitations in a much better way using our next-gen application, okay? So when it comes to the test execution aspect of it, by default, Selenium has a habit of executing tests sequentially. That is, each and every test case is executed one after the other. For example, in our e-commerce application case, if we want to interact with multiple web applications or web pages in a simultaneous manner, testing a product name on the product page, for example, let's say we want to test the product name on the products page, and parallelly we want to check the number of items in the cart on the cart page and so on. What happens is when we are using Selenium for testing, it will not be possible to test both the cases at the same time. Okay, so that is a limitation, and this happens because Selenium operates within a single browser instance, which allows it to interact with only one web page at a given point in time. Okay, and as a result, concurrent testing or parallel testing of different web pages is not supported in Selenium. Right. Next, let's talk about the test management aspect of it. Right. So in the context of an e-commerce application, sometimes there are situations where you might need to go through a series of steps to complete the test. Right. For example, if you take our e-commerce applications, users will typically go through a series of steps. Right. For example, they'll complete the registration step first, then they'll do the login, then they'll browse for available products, then add items to the cart, and finally they'll place an order altogether. Right. To effectively basically test the user journey, grouping the tests based on this particular flow becomes highly important. Okay. So let's say our user journey in our e-commerce application is something like this. First, we have the registration and login page, and then we have the product browsing aspect, then we'll add to the cart, then we'll check out and order place. Okay, right? For each of these steps, they'll have their own series of sub steps or maybe their own test cases, right? Obvious. So even if you consider the registration and login test group, what happens is we may have test cases like we'll verify the user registration functionality first, right? And then we'll successfully verify the login with valid credentials aspect. Okay, and then we'll also look into error handling and invalid login attempts altogether, right? So there could be multiple test cases like this. Okay, so the advantage with this is by grouping the registration and login test together, what happens is you can organize your entire test suite or test scenario, or you can structure your test scenario in a logical manner. Okay, it makes it easier to locate, manage, and maintain the test specifically related to the user authentication aspect. Okay, moreover, when you group the tests like this, you can selectively execute only the registration and login test as and when needed. Okay, so this basically enables us to focus on the testing aspect of the critical user authentication functionality separately from the other test scenarios. Okay, basically, to put it in a nutshell, it saves a lot of your execution time and resources as well. But Selenium has a limitation in this particular aspect, right? So Selenium itself does not have any kind of built-in capabilities for managing and organizing tests. It does not provide a straightforward way to categorize, sequence, or group tests, which kind of makes it difficult for us to manage large test scenarios. Okay, so as a result, test scripts for login, home, product details, cart pages, everything that you want to test will have to be stored in separate files altogether, and it will definitely lead to a scattered and unorganized test structure altogether, right? So we need to be very, very careful about it because it's a limitation. Okay, moving on, let's talk about test reporting. Okay, you see, when we generally run small tests, we can mentally keep a note of what tests were successful and what failed. But as and when we move ahead with larger test scenarios, it becomes very hard to keep track of things. Obviously, right? So Selenium does not have any kind of built-in capabilities to generate detailed reports that provide clear information about whether a test case has passed or failed. Okay, so this is another limitation. So the fundamental question now is, how do we overcome these limitations, right? Okay, so considering all the limitations, there are several frameworks out there so that will help you overcome these kind of limitations in Selenium testing. Okay, right? So a few popular ones are TestNG, JUnit, NUnit, XUnit, and so on and so forth. And each of them have their own features, their own purposes, their own pros and cons based on the technology they are working with. Okay, for our scope, we'll look at TestNG, right? So TestNG is basically a very, very powerful testing framework which offers very advanced functionalities like parallel test execution, test configuration, comprehensive reporting, and so on and so forth, right? Moreover, it's an open source automated testing framework where the NG of the TestNG means next generation, right? It is called next generation because it's inspired by JUnit and NUnit along with some new functionalities that makes it more powerful and very easy to use, right? So for the context of our understanding, JUnit is a unit testing framework for the Java programming language. Similarly, NUnit is a unit testing framework for the .NET .NET framework. Both of them are open source frameworks and they are used to write and run automated tests. Okay, right? And when it comes to using TestNG in general, there are a huge number of advantages, especially in the perspective of doing automation testing with Selenium, right? So you can perform parallel testing. There are annotations. We'll learn about annotations as we move forward. Okay, right? There is a scenario where you can group the test cases and prioritize them easily, right? It also gives us the ability to produce detailed reports of execution. Data parameterization is possible and much more, right? There are a whole lot of new features altogether, right? Okay, so now what we'll do is we'll look into installing and setting up TestNG into our system. Okay, so there are two steps involved when you're trying to set up TestNG in the IntelliJ IDEA, the basic IDE that we are using. There are two steps involved, right? The first step is to install the TestNG plugin. Okay, then we'll add the TestNG dependency in the pom.xml file. Okay, but before that, for the scope of this session, what we have done is we have provided you with the initial code in the reading material. All you have to do is click on the link in the reading material, download the initial session code, and then once you download it, you can just install the TestNG plugin. For that, we'll need to go to File, and then we'll have to go to Settings, and then in the Settings window, we'll open the plugins tab. Okay, and in that we'll have another small tab called as Install, where we'll search for TestNG. Okay, so by default, TestNG plugin is included in the IDE when you install it itself. But by chance, if your version of the IDE doesn't have it, this is how you install it. Okay, right? So let's take a look at the steps once again. All right, so what I've done is I've already downloaded and configured my IntelliJ IDEA, the first initial code. Okay, so to check if we have TestNG installed or not, we'll just go to File, and under which we'll just scroll down and we'll select Settings. Okay, so here we are, Settings. All right, so in the settings window, here you can see on the left side, you'll be able to see plugins over here. If you click on it, you'll see a tab called as Marketplace, there's installed updates and so on and so forth, right? So we need to check if the TestNG is installed or not. So what we'll do is we'll simply type TestNG, okay? And when you type TestNG, here you can see that there is TestNG-J something installed over here, right? Okay, so that basically confirms that we have successfully, we already have TestNG installed over here in our IDE, okay? Let's get back. Okay, so what we have done is we have basically checked whether TestNG has been successfully installed or not. Okay, then with the TestNG plugin already installed, we can directly proceed to creating the TestNG test classes and running our test using the TestNG annotations. Basically, IntelliJ IDEA, basically the IDE that we are using, it will recognize the TestNG annotations and provide support for executing those test cases, right? So now let's move on to adding the TestNG dependency in the pom.xml file. Okay, and how do you do that? We know that the pom.xml is a configuration file and it is used to add all kind of project dependencies, right? Okay, so to add a particular dependency, we can follow the same process that we followed for adding the Selenium Java dependency. Okay, so we'll need to first open the Maven central repository, then we'll have to search for the relevant package, then we'll have to download it and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's try this out once. All right, so here we are in the Maven repository. I've already opened it. Okay, so here in the search bar, what you can do is you can search for TestNG. Okay, so when you search for it and press enter, here you'll be able to see the TestNG module. Okay, you just need to click on it, and here we can see there are multiple versions available over there. You can choose the latest version, right? So 7.8.0 in this current scenario, 7.8.0 is the latest one, and they keep on updating these versions altogether, right? So under Maven, we'll just need to copy this part. What we'll do is we'll select all the way from dependency to dependency. I'll press Ctrl C. All right, okay. So this is what we have to do, right? So we have opened Maven, the repository, search for TestNG, and then we copied the relevant code, the dependency code, and all we have to do now is we'll have to go to the IDE and add it into our pom.xml file. Okay, let's do that as well. Okay, right? So let me just close this part, and this is our pom.xml file, right? So you just need to open this particular browsing part, okay? And here you can find the pom.xml, which is actually settled over here, which is actually open over here, right? So under this dependencies parent, all I have to do is I'll just simply, I'll just click it over here and I'll paste it, right? So here you can see org.testng has been put over here, and to implement this thing, all we need to do is go to Maven on the right side and click on refresh, right? So once you click on the reload for a couple of times, this TestNG part will get installed, and you will not see this in a red color anymore, right? You're basically setting up the required dependencies. All right, so let's just close this Maven tab. Let me just close this off. Okay, and let's get back. Right, so basically what we have done is we have navigated to the Maven repository, okay, search it for TestNG, and then we opened the version we needed, 7.8.0, right? And then we copied the required code, and now we know that pom.xml is a configuration file and it's used to add project dependencies, right? Okay, so what we did is we basically pasted it, and we took the copied code and we pasted it into our pom.xml file. Okay, so there are a few things that we need to observe over here, right? So we can add the dependencies, or whatever you call it, external support files and tools, into our project so that we can easily perform the task that we want to, right? So we basically added the copied code, and with the configuration that we have provided, Maven will download the required libraries and it will include it into our project. Okay, and once we have added the code, modified our pom.xml file, we can simply click on the refresh or reload button to apply the changes altogether, right? So until and unless the changes are applied, you'll see a red color over there in the pom.xml file. Once the changes are made, you'll not see the red color anymore. Okay, you can take that as an indication that the project files or the dependency files have been downloaded and applied to our project. Okay, right? Now, till now what we have done is we have basically done the setup of our TestNG, right? Now, if you remember, we had considered the registration and login test group, right? So let's let's keep the same as our objective for this particular session. Okay, in the sense we'll try to test the successful login case for the NextTrends application using the TestNG framework. Okay, now when you say testing the login functionality, it could be of many types, right? You could have correct login as in successful login, you could have unsuccessful login, right? And in the case of successful login, you'll give the correct username and the correct password, which will give you successful login, right? In the case of unsuccessful login, you'll either give the wrong username or the wrong password, or both of them could be wrong. There could be multiple scenarios. Okay, for this particular session, what we'll do is we'll simply test the successful login case. In the sense, we'll give the correct username and the correct password for our test case, right? For our scope, let's say we only want to test the successful login as we have just discussed. Okay, what will be the steps involved? We'll open the browser, we'll enter the URL of the application in the browser, we'll enter the username and password, then we'll click on the login button, and then we'll check if we are able to get redirected to the home page or not, right? The standard process, right? So let's try this out once. All right, so here we are in the required page, right? So we have opened the browser, we have navigated to this particular URL. What is the next step? We need to enter the username, which will be Rahul, and the password is Rahul@2021, right? As we usually do. Okay, and then we'll have to click on the login button. Let's just click on never over here. Okay, and then we can visually confirm that we are in the home page. Okay, right? So this is how we'll be testing our successful login functionality manually, right? Okay, so let's get back. Right, so these are the steps that we'll follow to see if the successful login functionality is working as expected or not, right? So let's get started and let's see how we can automate these steps using our code and especially using the TestNG framework. Okay, so first of all, we'll have to create a Java file for our testing. Okay, so let's do that once. All right, so here we are under src, under the test folder. This is where we'll be finding the Java file. Okay, Java folder. So we'll just click on new over here. We'll create a new Java class and let's call it login page test. Okay, so let's call it login page test, and here we'll have this thing called as public class login page test, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so let's get back. All right, so now to write our test cases, we have two approaches. We can either use Selenium without TestNG, or we can use TestNG in collaboration with Selenium, right? So in the first case where we don't use TestNG, the test case is written inside the main method, right? So so far that is the approach that we have followed, right? So you can use the main method to execute the test case. There are no specific annotations or no specific test frameworks that are provided by Selenium. Whereas when we use TestNG with Selenium, the test case is written as a separate method and it's annotated with @test. Okay, and TestNG provides a test framework that manages the entire execution of these test methods, right? You don't need to use the main method for executing test cases. And as we discussed earlier, we'll be using the second approach. We'll automate our entire test cases using TestNG with Selenium. Okay, right? But in this case, we'll be writing our code in a little different way. Firstly, what we'll do is we'll need to import something called as @test annotation. Okay, so if you break down the import statement over here, the import keyword, obviously it's used in Java to bring classes or packages into our code file so that we can use them without mentioning their fully qualified names altogether, right? This org.testng part refers to the package within the TestNG framework, and these packages are used to organize the classes, provide a unique namespace for the classes with the same name, right? Okay, and this annotation is a sub package within the TestNG framework, and it provides you the relevant instructions so that you can actually start working with the test methods, test classes, or test scenarios altogether. Okay, and this test part, it's a class or it's an interface provided by TestNG which represents the @test annotation. Okay, you can use it to mark a particular method or a particular function as a test case within the test class. Okay, so when you import this thing, we are basically saying that our program can use the @test annotation so that we can actually mark different methods as test cases. Okay, but then we would also be writing our required test cases as shown in the slide. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll have to write @test followed by the test case method, public void login with valid credentials. Okay, because we are checking the successful login case. Okay, but before we move ahead with all of this, what we'll do is let's try to quickly understand what exactly is the test annotation, and then we would be writing our required test case as shown in the slide, right? So we'll be writing @test followed by the test case method, public void login with valid credentials, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, so let's give it a try once. All right, so here we are in our code playground. Okay, that's the IDE. So first of all, we need to import the relevant package and classes, right? So we'll write import org dot let's call it testing, the TestNG annotations, and under which we want specifically the test of class or the test method, right? So the next step would be to basically write the relevant annotations over here, right? Okay, and how will we do that? We'll just simply mention, we'll go to the public class login page test, we'll mention @test over here, right? Which basically represents whatever function is coming later or whatever method we are writing later will be considered as a test case altogether, right? So we've written @test case, we'll write public void. Okay, let's call it login with valid credentials. Okay, so login with valid credentials. Valid. All right, so we'll just create this method. Okay, so what we have basically done is we have created a new test case altogether, and what we'll write inside will be executed as a test case. Okay, right? Let's get back. But before we move ahead with all of this, let's quickly try to understand what exactly is a test annotation, right? So in TestNG, the test next generation, the @test annotation is used to mark a method as a test method. Okay, so when you annotate or label a method with @test, TestNG will treat it as a test case and it executes it during the test execution. Okay, you can simply think of it like this: annotation equal to labeling. Okay, so basically means when you say I've written @test annotation, what you're basically saying is I'm labeling the next few lines of the code as a test case. Okay, right? So this is highly useful when you're working with frameworks like TestNG. When you use the @test annotation, we are explicitly telling our program that the next few lines of the code are a test case, and it makes it easier for the testing framework to recognize and execute the test. Okay, so in fact, when the testing framework runs, it scans for methods marked with @test and it executes them as individual test cases. Okay, so this allows for automated and systematic execution of tests. Without this, TestNG will ignore the method which does not contain any kind of annotation. Okay, now we have understood what exactly does the test annotation mean. Okay, so let's start off with writing our code to test the successful login functionality. Now we already know the steps that we need to do. Firstly, we'll need to import the necessary package and classes. Okay, and in this case, we'll need to import the WebDriver and ChromeDriver classes. Then in the test function where we have added the @test annotation, we'll have to write the code for our test case. Okay, so as the first step, let's add the code to the open the Chrome browser instance and navigate to the login page. Okay, right? Let's try this out. All right, so we are in the IDE, right? So first step is to basically import the relevant classes and packages, right? So we'll write import org dot openqa, not TestNG. We need to write openqa.selenium, and under this we need the WebDriver class, right? So we'll write WebDriver class over here, give it a semicolon, right? And similarly, we'll also import the org.openqa selenium. Under this we need the Chrome driver, right? So under which we'll go for the Chrome driver. All right, so you can make use of this prompting as well. Okay, right? So now we have basically imported the relevant packages, right? So how do we start the Chrome driver? We need to use the system.setProperty method, right? So what we'll do is we'll just write the code for opening the Chrome browser instance. Okay, so let's call it this. So we'll use the system dot set property. So here we have set properties. So here we have the set property method, under which we'll need to add two things, right? So first of all, we'll need to mention that the web driver that we are going to use is a Chrome driver, right? So we'll write web driver dot Chrome, right? So we'll just write CHROME Chrome dot driver. Okay, we'll just write it over here, and here in double quotes we need to mention the path to Chrome driver. Okay, right? So let me just add it right away. So all right, so here we have the Chrome driver.exe file. All we have to do is right click on it, copy as path. Let me just minimize this, and in this double quotes we need to paste the entire path. And as usual, we'll just remove the extra characters over here, this backslash double quote, and we'll do not forget to add the semicolon over here, right? This is very, very important. Okay, now we have basically told our program where exactly to find the Chrome driver, right? And now what's the next step? We'll use the WebDriver instance to create a new driver called as driver. Basically, we'll just create new Chrome driver, where we'll basically ask our driver to get a URL, right? So we'll just copy the URL from the browser. Okay, so right, so here we are in the browser, and let me just click on logout just so that we are back to the login page, and we need to copy this URL. Okay, right? So what we'll do is we have defined a new instance of this. Okay, we'll use the driver.get method to basically give our entire URL over here. Okay, right? So let's run the code and let's see what happens. Okay, right. So as you can see over here, the Chrome driver has started successfully, and we can see a new instance of this particular browser. Okay, right? So here you can see all the details, default, so total test run, and so on and so forth. We'll discuss about it at a later point in time. Okay, let's get back. All right. So what we have basically done is we have successfully set up our Chrome driver and opened a new browser instance altogether. Okay, right. So we are done with the first two steps: opening the Chrome browser, navigating to the login page. So what's the next step? We need to locate the username, password, and the button elements and perform actions on them. Right. Okay. So let's do that. So here we are in our IDE, right? Firstly, because we are interacting with web elements and we are trying to locate them, we need to import the necessary classes, right? So what we'll do is we'll just simply import the relevant classes, import org.openqa selenium. And what is the element, what are the classes that we want? Web element and by. Okay, so we'll just write web element over here, give it a semicolon. Then we'll import the next one, org.openqa selenium, and we'll import the by class. Okay, so you can make use of the prompts accordingly. All right, so once we have imported these things, all we need to do is we just need to actually locate the particular username element, right? So let's say locate the username element and send username. You can write any kind of comment over here. All right, so because we have imported the web element class, all we need to do is we'll just write web element, let's call it the username element, okay, equal to, we'll ask our driver to find an element by its ID, right? As we know, the ID is username, right? So we'll just write username over here, right? We'll give it a semicolon, and then all we need to do is just use the username element and use the send keys method, right? So we'll just write username element dot send keys of. We know that the username is Rahul, all right? So we'll just write Rahul over here. We'll just save this, and let's see what happens when we run the code. Okay, right. So as you can see over here, we have the username Rahul already entered over here, right? So we'll just close this off. We'll minimize this part and we'll just scroll down a little. Let's apply the same logic to our password element and the button element as well, right? Okay. So all we need to do is we need to locate the password element and send the password, right? You can write any comment over here as usual. Okay. So once again, web element, let's call this as password element, right? Equal to, we'll ask our driver to Chrome driver basically to find an element by its ID again, and this time the ID is password, right? Okay, so you can find these IDs as we have discussed earlier. Also, you can actually navigate to the DOM and actually find the relevant IDs and everything as such. Okay, for the sake of this particular session, I'm going ahead with this part. Okay, so we'll just simply write password element dot send keys off, and we'll just give the password over here as Rahul at the rate 2021. Okay, we already know the password, and finally we want to locate the button element, right? So we want to locate the button element and click on it, right? So all we need to do is locate the button element and click on it, right? So all we need to do is we'll write web element, let's call it as maybe login button element, right? So we'll just write login button element equal to driver. As usual, driver will ask our Chrome driver to find an element by, this time we want the class name, right? So by dot class name, this is what we're going to use, and the class name, as we would have seen, is login hyphen btn or login hyphen button. Right, you can find this particular class name in the DOM. Let's take a quick look at it. Okay, right. All right, so this is where we are. If we right click on this and click on inspect, here we'll be able to see the entire thing. Okay, and here you can see button type equal to submit, and the class is login hyphen button. Okay, in the same way you can identify the IDs of the username and password as well, right? So let me just click on it, right click, inspect on this, and here you can see the input type equal to test and ID equal to username, right? Similarly, it will be the same for the password element as well, ID equal to password, and so on and so forth. Okay, right. Let me just quickly close this. Okay, and we are back to our ID. All right, so we have identified our button element as well. All we need to do is we'll just simply type login button, or basically we'll just write login button element, right? So we'll just need to give a semicolon over here. This is very, very important. Do not forget about it. Okay, so login button element dot, all we need to do is submit the details, right? So we'll just use the submit method over here. We'll control press S. Okay, control save, and then let's run the code and let's see what happens. All right, so the browser opened, the username and password are sent, and we can visually confirm that basically the home page has been loaded. All right, okay, so let me just quickly close this part and minimize this part. Okay, let's get back. So we located the username, the password element, and the login button element as well, and we performed the necessary actions on them. This basically covers the third and fourth steps in our test scenario. Okay, right? Moreover, we were able to visually confirm that we have navigated to the home page as well, right? So it's time to check programmatically and validate this. Okay, for that we know what we need to do. We just need to compare the expected URL and the loaded URL, right? Obvious. So let's do that as well. All right. So let's go to the IDE. Okay, so here we are, and we know that first of all we need to specifically define the expected URL. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just quickly scroll down. We'll write a string expected URL equal to, in double quotes, we need to mention the homepage URL over here. Okay, let's go to the browser, copy this and come back. So here we have it. We'll just copy this part. We'll just navigate over here. We'll just paste it over here, and we have the string expected URL all set. Okay, and we also know that our program needs to wait for a little while before capturing the current URL, right? So we'll have to import the necessary packages and then write our code accordingly. Okay, how do we know that? We understand that there is a situation where certain elements on a web page might not load properly, so the web page might not be fully loaded altogether. So we want to make sure that our program grabs the correct URL only after those elements are loaded, which is why we'll ask it to wait for a little while. Okay, right? So all we need to do is we'll just need to simply go to the import section. Okay, we'll just add an import statement over here, and what do we need to do? We just need to include the expected conditions and the WebDriver wait functionalities. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll write import org.openqa selenium support, under which we have the UI elements, under which we want the expected conditions element. Okay, a conditions class basically. Okay, right. And then what we need to do, we need to import org.openqa selenium, and under which again support UI, and this is where we'll include the WebDriver wait class. Similarly, we will also import java dot time dot under which we'll specifically mention the durations part. Okay, right? So we'll just import this particular class as well, and all we need to do is we'll just quickly go down and then we'll write our relevant code over here. Right? Okay, so what we are doing over here is we basically want our particular code to wait for a while. For that we'll use the WebDriver wait class. Let's call it we'll give the object name as wait equal to new WebDriver wait of, the first thing we need to mention over here is the driver. We want to ask our Chrome driver to wait for a duration of seconds, where the seconds would be 10. All right, so this is the condition that we want to do. And how long should it wait until the expected conditions are matching, right? So expected conditions are that the URL should be equal to the expected URL, right? So we'll just write expected URL over here. What we are basically doing is we are creating a new instance of the WebDriver wait class where the WebDriver will ask our Chrome driver to wait for 10 seconds or until the expected conditions are that the URL should be expected URL. Okay, right? Pretty straightforward, right? So what's the next step? We'll have to grab the current URL. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll just write a string current URL equal to driver dot get current URL. Pretty straightforward, right? So we'll just save this part. Now here, there is something that we need to think about. Okay, right? Okay, let's get back. So we have defined the expected URL, asked our code to wait until the expected conditions are satisfied, basically until the URL gets loaded. And finally, we have grabbed the required URL as well. Okay. Now as the final step, we basically need to compare the current URL with the expected URL and validate programmatically that we have navigated to the expected home page. But for that, we have so far been using the if conditions, right? But when it comes to using the TestNG framework, there's an interesting concept called as assertions. Okay. So you can think of it like this. Assertions in TestNG, they are a way which helps us to verify that the expected result and the actual result are matching or not. Okay. So in simple terms, they allow you to validate whether the code being tested produces the expected results or not. Okay, and during a test execution, when the code faces an assertion, it will basically check if the specified condition is true or not. If the condition is true, the test continues execution. If the condition is false, the assertion fails and the test execution is stopped. Pretty straightforward, right? Okay, so to use the assertions in the TestNG framework, we'll need to use another package called as assert. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll first add it into our code, relevant code, we'll just add it into our code, and then we'll try to break it down and understand what exactly it means. Okay, right? So let's try this out. All right, so here we are. We need to import another package or another class called as assert, right? So we'll just write import org. This time we want the TestNG framework in which we want the asserts. Okay, right? So we'll just write import org.testng.assert. All right. So here, what we'll do next is we just need to write another statement which basically checks whether the expected condition is matched or not. Right. So we'll write assert dot we'll just use the assert equals class, okay, where we'll check the expected URL, right, comma, the current URL, right? So we'll just write current URL and followed by, we can give an optional message in case it fails, right? We'll just say URLs do not match. Okay, so this is an optional message that you can provide. All right, we'll just save this. Let's try to understand this and then we'll try to execute this part. Okay, right? Let's get back. All right. So basically, to break down what we have just written is the import statement basically imports the relevant packages all together, right? And by importing org.testng.assert, we are bringing the assert class into our code file, allowing to use its assertion methods altogether, right? And this assert is basically a class provided by the TestNG framework so that you can perform assertions or conditional checks on your test cases. Okay, it contains a set of assertion methods that you can use to validate the expected outcomes or conditions during the test execution. Okay. Moreover, in our case, the assert.assert equals method from the assert class is used to compare the actual and the expected values. That is the expected URL we have and the current URL that is matched. Okay, you can actually interchange the positions of the actual and expected values as long as the condition and the data type of those things don't change. That is, you can either write the expected URL or the current Selenium without TestNG to compare or validate the expected outcomes. We will typically need to use if-else statements, right? We'll write if condition, then we'll write an else condition, and so on and so forth. We are manually comparing the values or conditions and handling the logic ourselves. For example, if our code, if we would do it using Selenium without TestNG, we'll write if actual condition equals expected condition, system.out.println test passed. If not or else, system.out.println test fails, right? Whereas using TestNG with Selenium, what happens is it provides us built-in assertions through which we can actually compare and validate the expected outcomes, right? We can directly use assertions to compare values, conditions, and in fact expected results also. Okay, and our statement would be as simple as assert equals of actual test and expected test. As simple as that. Okay, right? So finally, we can close our browser when the test is complete. Okay, so let's try this out as well. All right, so all we need to do over here is we'll simply write driver.close. All right, so we'll just simply write driver.close. We'll save it, we'll run the code, and let's see what happens. Okay, so we have logged in and we have successfully completed the test case, right? So here you can see that the total test run is 1, passes are 1, there are 0 failures, and so on and so forth. Okay, right? Let's get back. All right, so we executed our test code and we saw that the output was successful. Okay, we will also see a small summary of the test case execution, how many test cases were executed, how many passed, how many failures, and so on and so forth, right? To quickly summarize what we have learned in this particular session, we have started off with a new concept called as TestNG, right? And where we understood what exactly does it do, and what are the features and everything as such. Then we looked at how we can install TestNG.